Croeso i'r seminar Ymchwil diweddara yn Ysgol Gymraeg. Welcome to the latest research seminar in School of Welsh. We're joined by some companions online and in the room physically. You're all very welcome. Today we have a PhD student of ours speaking, John Prendergast, who has been with us more than once, to be honest. But he's well known to us, and he's becoming extremely well known in Ireland as well as an advocate and somebody who's beginning to develop, I think, what will become a pretty significant career in language policy and planning over there. He's going to be speaking today about his PhD and some of the more significant results arising out of that. And the PhD is entitled The Implementation of Language Planning in Ireland since 2012. John will speak for about, 40 minutes or so. And then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions both in the room and online. Felly, dyma ni, John.
Diolch yn fawr, Dermot. And croeso I diolch yn fawr. I'm Anna Hostevan, so delighted to be here. Especially after, dwi dod o Iwerddon, obviously, and, hapus iawn with the whole match there, the rugby, this has been with us, so, diolch yn fawr, it is great. And yeah, like Dermot said as well, dwi wedi studio yma 10 years ago, so yeah, it's great to be back, Anna Hosta, hapus iawn, so hopefully this will be of interest to some of you as well, just in terms of collaboration and also comparative, I suppose, language planning and language policies that we can be looking at. So ben behind, I'll be talking a little bit just about language planning in Ireland. I was the West Kerry language planner for 5.5 years, and so I'll be drawing from a little bit of that experience. And then we'll be looking at the research in my PhD as well, looking at the implementation of language planning in Ireland and the process as it stands since 2012. And then looking at some of the bigger results really that have come out of that. Hello, Al. Goody Hugh was just saying thank you. And then finishing up just with a few macro level, I suppose, observations and then some overall conclusions and recommendations to what we can do going forward. So in terms of background for the language planning process in Ireland, Commission na Gaeltachta 2002, the Gaeltacht Commission report in 2002 was really the first language, I suppose, policy from the state to put in writing that we needed some sort of structure for the promotion of Irish as a vernacular language in the Gaeltacht, particularly the Irish-speaking areas, mostly in the west of Ireland. However, it was in Strategic Feidhmniú and Gaeilge, or the 20-year policy for the Irish language, which was published in 2010 to 2030, that the language planning process was really first capitulated. Overall, that document was quite unceremoniously shelved due to the time that it came out in terms of the old end of the Celtic Tiger in Ireland and the recession. However, a lot of the major observations on that are still, I suppose, held on to by especially people within language policy and language activism. We got the 2012 Gaeltacht Act was the first, I suppose, legislative capitulation of the language planning process in Ireland, and that delineated on paper, black and white, what the language planning process would look like, what the categories are, and what the areas would be as well. So just really in Ireland, as an overview as well, the definition we're giving ourselves for language planning is the action or any sort of change to the use or status of the language. The goal, we would probably think to something to the extent of increasing the amount of speakers of the Irish language, the density. So each plan might have their own particular goal, but overall, the idea is to increase the amount of Irish speakers that speak the language daily. And this is, I suppose, an interesting as well from previous state policy, because it's the first time the state has said to itself to increase the amount of daily active speakers of the language in communities where they speak Irish. So this came nearly 90 years after the conception of the state as well. So Mos Maulis Mihid, even if it's late, it's welcome, as we say. So generally the language plans are community written. People come together and they discuss what actions they want to put into it. And then it's a local organization then that would be in charge of employing the language planner, who is the person who comes in,
sees the 50 or 60 actions across themes that they want to enact, and then it's the language planner who has to make sure that all those actions are the ones are undertaken and accomplished. There's also a voluntary committee, usually the people who helped to write the plan, and those are the people who would be meeting with the language planner maybe monthly, weekly, thrice annually, just to keep them on the straight and narrow. But they're intended to be a very, I suppose, democratic and very locally democratic function as well, in terms of the implementation of the plan. So there's a 7-year life cycle for each plan, and so all of the plans essentially in the Gaeltacht started after 2018. So the first ones we're seeing are actually finished now. So I can think of 6 or 7 of the 26 language planning areas that have finished their implementation. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a while. And then in terms of state agencies as well, Údarás na Gaeltachta would be in charge of all the language planning activities inside the Gaeltacht. And then Feras na Gaeilge, another state body, the main Cognac Griacht, or key organisation for the Irish language in Ireland, would be in charge of language planning outside the Gaeltacht area. So they're in charge of administrating the process, providing supports, bringing people together, and making sure that that everything is running smoothly from their end. The department of the Gaeltacht then, so the state department in which all of this trickles down, is responsible for reviewing each plan after year 3 and year 6 of implementation. But spoiler alert, that did not happen. So just to temper expectations as well, just to see that's what happens. Came out of the guidelines, and the last guidelines were published in January 2019. So we're still waiting for guidelines in terms of how the plans can get implemented. So that's just why implementation of language planning is my research topic as well. I suppose I was a language planner at the time, and I was waiting for, like any good student would do, waiting for advice from the top. And it's like I always say, doing some sort of lessons, or learning a language, you're doing the lessons and you're expecting the exam at the end. And we were the nerds who were doing the language planning around the country, saying, please examine us, please pick us, show us how to succeed at this. So that's why I chucked this kind of research topic on top of myself as well in the work. And just in general, the research questions, just making analysis of the efficiency of the language planning process, the LPP, and investigating micro level language planning, so how it's going in the geographical areas, and then macro level as well, just generally how the state is cohesively promoting Irish in these situations. And I've touched on this briefly, but just to give a structure of the language planning process as well. So we see obviously the Minister for the Gaeltacht and the Government Department will be top of the food chain here, and it runs the whole way down from the department within Department of the Gaeltacht that's responsible for language planning. And then we split into 2 different branches, I suppose. Údarás na Gaeltachta in the Gaeltacht, and Feras na Gaeilge outside it. Both have staff, I suppose, with responsibility for language planning. And then it goes down to the local bodies then in the geographical areas. So you'd have the lead organisation, who would be the employers, and then the voluntary language planning committee, but that all feeds down into the ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga, or the language planning officer. I've kind of restructured that as well, just to show where the narrow point is, and it isn't at the top, I'm afraid. It seems to be this the case where a lot of the work and a lot of the expectation is actually falling on the shoulders of one person within the sphere, the language planning officer, the ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga, and then the community kind of comes underneath that as well, obviously. So just in terms of the structure overall of the language planning process, it was supposed to be a top-down, bottom-up system, so that the state would be doing its part, and that the local communities, the grassroots communities, from the legislation and from all the best practice, would be writing the plans, being their best selves, and trying all they could do to increase the use of Irish in the area. But we're seeing that there is a bit of a disconnect between the efforts from the state and from the bottom up. To give you a flavour as well of where language planning is happening in Ireland, we have 3 major categories. First of all, from Acht na Gaeltachta Gábhíle Dóigh, from the 2012 Gaeltacht Act. So we have the first category of language planning, which would be Limistéir Pleanála Teanga Gaeltachta, or traditional Gaeltacht areas. Now they're mostly on the west coast of Ireland: Donegal, Mayo, Galway, Kerry, Hub Kerry. We have some in Cork, Waterford, and then County Meath as well. So they're the 7 counties with language plans in them as pertains to Gaeltacht areas. But we also have a second category, or Balta Servicia Gaeltachta, which would be Gaeltacht service towns. So these are kind of categorized as towns or urban entities or centres within or without Gaeltacht areas that would be, I suppose, providing services of use to people from the Gaeltacht. So it could be anything as simple as a guard, or using police services, or even going to the doctor or the hospital or anything like that. So just with the expectation that there would be services provided through the medium of the Irish language there, and hopefully that the people from the Gaeltacht would be able to make use of it, and also the general people in the area. And then the third category of language planning that we have here as well would be Líonra Gaeilge, which would be an Irish language network. And they're places which would have a more substantial, we'll say, infrastructure in the community for Irish language, be it community groups or services or educational facilities, but they wouldn't fall under the category of a Gaeltacht service town. So generally they're actually quite strong areas where we've seen quite a revival of the Irish language in the last 40 or 50 years due to individual efforts more so than anything else. So we have Carntucher and Iwerddon Ferrishte, we have Carntucher in South Derry, and Bale Ferrishte, West Belfast as well in County Antrim. We have Inishka in County Clare, County Town of Clare. We have a little area outside Dublin called Clondalkin, and we have Ballinlucheriach as well in Galway. So there's 26 of the Gaeltacht language planning areas. There's 16 Gaeltacht service towns, and there's 5 at present Irish language networks. And each of these places gets their own, at least one Ymchwil Pleanála Teanga. They get funding to employ the language planning officer, and they will get a plan as well, a 7-year plan in which they write multi-thematic plans just to increase the amount of Irish being used or spoken in that area. So I just wanted to have a quick look at how one of these plans might work in practice. West Kerry here, I used to live just where the E is there in Ballinurtairig, 5.5 years implementing a 7-year plan. So the idea, as I said earlier, is to increase the amount of daily speakers of the language in the area. So you see here the statistics from West Kerry. There's around 7,000 people in West Kerry. There's around 5,000 people, according to local census as well, that have Irish. And then of that data as well, around 3,000 people speak Irish of the 7,000 every day. So the job of the language planner in that area is to get that 3,000 people and, make it 4,000, make it 5,000, make it 6,000. I'd always think to myself if I was walking around Dingle in West Kerry and I said, if I met 7 people, I'll be able to, and if I say Diachit Conastantu, like Shemai Sitviti to 7 people, there's 3 of them I could have a conversation with, no bother. There's 5 of them who'd understand me and be able to talk back maybe, and there's 2 that you've yet to bring to the cause. But it's kind of an easy way to bring that all together. In terms of what we actually did in West Kerry as well, like I mentioned, the plan would be overarching. You'd be working with education one day. Most days you'd be working with more than one team, obviously, running around trying to do as much as possible. But you'd be working with young people, you'd be working with childcare facilities, you'd be working with families, you'd be working with businesses, you'd be working with local musicians, anything and everything you can do. Really, it was a bit of a let's see what sticks kind of model. A good few things did stick, and a lot of other things didn't stick. But that's the learning curve as well, I suppose, with a new process. So just some pictures here as well of a lot of that was during COVID, I think, the top left one, and it was a summer camp we ran, and we could only have up to 15 students because of the pods and the social distancing rules at the time. So we ran the same campus Áraig or summer camp like 5 times in a row, like just different, days on days and days. Irish learning opportunities for adults as well, making sure that anyone who wanted to return to the language or learn a bit or use it could. So we'd have structures for people like parenting through the Feidhmniú of Irish, people who are coming in at A1, and people who are returning to the language after their A levels or their leaving cert, because they're the type of people who are more likely to say to you, I don't speak any Irish. but they've obviously done the Leaving Cert in Ireland and would have some language contact. So just being able to bring people back in that way. Families, obviously, I don't need to say to anyone in this room, the pillar of language, intergenerational transmission, and one of the most important foundational tenets of language planning. So just providing lots of different supports to families as well. We were lucky in the area, there was good infrastructure for that anyway. So even things like, we made these little milestone cards, for example, like I started walking today, Santa came or something like that, so having that all available through Mean of Irish for families, lots of different booklets, lots of different events for families and parents, and obviously then more strategic works like trying to talk to the health service executive about providing particular services to the Irish there, or ensuring people that they could use their Irish when talking to the doctors and the nurses in the local hospital and that kind of thing, and then sport as well, obviously, but lots of different examples there across several different themes. So like I say, a very, very far-reaching and expansive role, but a very fun one as well. Two small examples as well of just schemes. So one was called Gael, which I was led to believe was based on, I should add, the Welsh mentorship scheme, which I've since come to learn that it comes from a Catalan example. So it's great, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with the concept. A fluent speaker, possibly native speaker, but not needed to be, paired up with an improver, and all we said was 20 hours together over the course of 6 months, we'll give you £50, we'll give you €100, whatever at the end of it, just prove to us you're doing it. And like we say, it was just in the context of the scheme and in the context of the process, it was just an open door for people. It was just an excuse for people to get together. And it was brilliant. Like, we did it 4 or 5 years in a row. We had people who enjoyed it so much that they ended up writing books together. We had people who went out swimming every morning and then said, I don't want to stop with one other person. I want this person to be involved as well. So we just had groups going out, doing things, the multiplier effect really taking hold there. And we had 2 people who moved in with each other. So if that's not language planning, then I can't tell you what is, I guess. The second scheme, I think, was just an idea as well, similar to that, train the trainer, essentially. We were aware that a lot of people who'd be out training sports, basketball, football, rugby, soccer, obviously a very voluntary sector, so you're depending on people to come and give their time. However, we noticed that not a lot of the training was happening through the medium of Irish, in some cases, particularly soccer and other sports like that wouldn't be maybe really rooted in the community in as much as Gaelic football would be. Even the rugby was pretty good actually at one point. So we just employed 3 helpers to go out, and Mantori Teanga, just language advisors, to go out and help the trainers use more Irish and have them, I suppose, the kids be more aware as well. It was primarily based underage, but obviously the seniors got involved as well, and that worked out very well as well. Just in terms of, we had the girl furthest on the right there, Sinead Nichogon, she went to like the under 14 girls one Saturday morning. She said, "Right, Chalini, Shin and Ish beg again." So she's like, "Right, girls, that's it now. From now on, everything will be in Irish." And the girls, there's 3 or 4 girls in front of her, and they were just like, okay. So it was just as easy as that in certain cases. And again, obviously, there was lots of prizes at the end. It was like a prestige kind of, I suppose, scheme, just making sure that they were cognizant of their language use. If they started off with 20%, of their trainings through Irish and matches through Irish at the start of the scheme, we were monitoring how much they were self-reporting at the end, 40, 50 places, percentage points rising. So very useful and very, again, a good way to get a lot more people involved than just ourselves. Plenty other schemes. I won't go into all of them. Leachar Amlón, a kind of an educational initiative where we got kids out of the schools and we put them in contact with really, in my opinion, cool young people. I don't know if that means anything really, but just in terms of what they were achieving for the community, they were all under the age of 35. For example, Anini Hivan up here is a local artist. She is the person responsible for a lot of the murals behind you see in Pookie's Lane, Sedangan. So she was able to talk them all through that and her work as a visual artist. And same with Roisin ní Chéalachair. She's a broadcaster and an actor and a musician and a singer, and worked with Radio na Gaeltachta. But she was able to talk to the kids about, singing at Ireland's largest music festival, Electric Picnic, acting in TG Cahir documentaries and other things like that. So I think it's important to show the young people that there are even local young people who have achieved so much, and again, adding to that, I suppose, prestige, adding to that sense of worth, I think, because that's something that was ideologically lacking a lot beforehand. And yeah, like I say, just prizes, just making sure that the good efforts are being realised, are being recognised. Youth work, another fundamental tenet of what we were wanting to achieve. So when I came to be a language planner in West Kerry, there was no youth club through the medium of Irish for young people. There were some that were intended to be and were just mostly de facto English. So by the end of 2023, due to the hard work of Evelyn, a colleague there on the far picture there on the left, we had over 80 children subscribed for a new Irish language youth club, which had failed 3 times previously. We'd have like open nights for parents, and we'd be looking at the door on a rainy Friday evening in February in West Kerry, and no one would come in. And so we went from that to not having to turn people away, because that would be anti-language planning, but having a waiting list, and again adding to that sense of excitement about the language. If you've ever seen the movie 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, my passive-aggressive streak came out here. So just in terms of putting up these very cheap cardboard signs, €30, €40, great language planning value there, and put them all around the area, just saying things like Ashin Gael and Teanga na Gaeltachta. Irish is the language of the Gaeltacht, and then the Garum Chunginiv, the call to action. Caerdydd leis an Gael and leis an Gaeltacht Laura Gael, and please help the Gaeltacht by speaking Irish. So trying to make people understand, I suppose, that the individual does have a huge role to play in terms of language planning and what we can all do together. Further examples of social events, I won't go through it all with you. My personal favourite of this one was the big karaoke night, I think. There's this guy called Karaoke na Gaeilge, and he does all the songs in Irish, and he's put together a PDF of nearly the book, the kind of booklet of the songs, and we had a great night. I'd say we were up till 2 or 3 in the pub, in the back of the pub, and people were coming in off the street, rapping through Irish, singing all sorts of songs. It was a great crack, and the hangover was worth it, I think. Just in terms of the methodology as well, now with the PhD. So in terms of getting people's experiences as well and trying to get a really broad reach, I decided to run 10 interviews with select people, and also 5 focus groups across the island of Ireland. So we just have some facts and figures there. Overall, nearly 90,000 words written out to be transcribed, which I wrote out and I analysed thematically, using Teget and all that. So it came up with generally broad, unsurprising themes, I'm going to have to say, by virtue of being in the field myself. And just in terms of where the location of the interviewees and focus groups were as well, kind of a broad reach: Donegal, Galway, Clare, Kerry, Cork, Waterford, Meath, Dublin, Antrim and County Down as well. So a mixture there between different focus groups and different interviews. And interestingly, like some of the discourse coming back as well was slightly different between some of it, but it still made for very rich results, which we'll go into now. The results of the language, not the results of the PhD, but the results of the language planning process as well so far. So just bearing in mind that the first plans were, I suppose, started to be implemented at the end of 2018, at the start of 2019, and then COVID hit, which I'm not using as an excuse or anything like that. It's just something, I suppose that's a material fact. The amount of Irish daily speakers in the Gaeltacht from 2016 to 2022, which is our first census since the language planning process started, sees a drop in most Gaeltacht areas, quite a substantial drop in Mayo, which has often been struggling and long been struggling, and a rise in the Waterford Gaeltacht and in the Kerry Gaeltacht as well, the 2 Gaeltacht areas in Kerry, but overall a decrease in the daily speakers of the Irish language. in the Gaeltacht. Now, an overall increase of the people who self-reported in the census as having Irish language capacity nationwide. But that, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a different story as well. In the West Kerry example as well, there was an increase of people with Irish language capacity. I'm not saying that's down entirely to the work that we were doing, because it's all very fit a futa or built in with every other group and every other community's efforts. But it did. I'm going to say that it definitely did help. So there's the West Kerry language plan, and there is a Gaeltacht service town for Dingle as well. So we were lucky that myself and my friend Christine as well, who's pictured up there, we were working on it together, and she'd worked with me in West Kerry as well. So there was a very strong focus in terms of working with the youth, working with businesses, and trying to provide all the supports and the advantages we could for the Irish language. And that led to overall a 4% increase in the amount of daily speakers of the Irish language from 2016 to 2022. And that was the first time there was an increase in a long while as well. So it's good to have the figures going up. We honestly didn't expect it, really. We thought there'd be a small little bit of an attenuation in the decrease. So yeah, it's all very variable, but that's the only type of review and the only type of statistics we can work with at the moment, I suppose, because of the lack of any other sociolinguistic kind of research in the area. What does work in terms of language planning best practice? I've mentioned a lot of it already, but recognition for native speakers and their efforts as well, as is the same in the Welsh example. Raising children to the medium of the minority language is obviously nothing easy, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of patience as well. So trying to give people, I suppose, all the supports they can to do it, but also give it in such a way that makes them feel like what they're doing is valuable, which it is. It's a social good, and it's something that's very, very important. One thing that I learned that I thought was important as well was creating a need for the language as well in the area, particularly in areas where the language is strong. There should be spaces for people to only speak Irish, and there should be spaces where it's expected that people have to have a level of Irish to participate. They can come in and they can, enjoy, but not to try to change the linguistic ethos of the room, and that's one of the things that came through the research. Someone said, I think we're better now at not switching over now. If there's 10 of us in the room and one person walks in speaking English, I think we're better now at not changing the entire language dynamic for the benefit of that one person. I do love a good sign, as you saw there in the things. So just like, the visibility adding to the linguistic landscape as well, and that visibility as well, implanting in people's ideas where they are. We're in a Gaeltacht area, we're in a language planning area. I'm aware that the Irish language is spoken here. In fact, I'm going to use some of the Irish language. I might not have a whole pile, or maybe I'm incredibly fluent, but I'll be using it because I know I can, which leads to more people speaking it, more people hearing it. So it's all an ecosystem in terms of how we achieve that. And then as well, the community activity as well, making sure that it is actually cooperative and making sure that you're not the one doing the speaking for people. You can bring the horse to water, but you can't make...
So you should have soon off a minute. Yeah. So pretty.
Not sure if that was a question or... but yeah, just making sure that the community is empowered to run with the language planning ideas and philosophies, because it actually doesn't matter what you do. I think what matters is how the community receives it and what they take from it and how they run with it in that regard. So we got a lot of positive feedback and a lot of positive stories. For example, Seamus O'Keefe, I'm not sure if any of you are in West Kerry, but this is one of the oldest Fáin or oldest Thop Eileen Colorist. It's one of the oldest archaeological sites in West Kerry, an old church. And he's been in charge of it for 40 years in the tourist centre there. And he had a lovely sign here saying, with Lower, if you have Irish, speak it. We just gave him a bigger sign. That's all it was, a branded bigger sign, as I'm sure you've all seen in the Welsh examples and stuff. And he came back to me at one point and he said it was the best year of Irish he had in his 40 years of working in Galway. And I'm sure a lot of that had something to do with maybe inward tourism in those years as well after COVID, and people holidaying at home, and people, I think maybe the general upsurge of Irish speaking in Ireland as well, and wanting to give it a go. So very, very, very generally very, very good positive feedback. Lots of nice anecdotal stories, but again, lack of empirical
evidence, lack of review, lack of figures, which we really desperately needed from the graduate department. In terms of the graduate department, in terms of the results of the study itself that I did, you just see three overview quotes here. Níl an Stát ná riadh dá riadh chéad fan géad pen dogra so éiv na Gaelana. The state isn't really truly 100% behind this project, behind the Irish language. The huge workload on the individual people working is probably the biggest problem. And people asking what the next step was, what's the certainty coming from this? You know, we just want communication about the process. So looking for next steps, looking for what was promised to be given and that kind of thing. So that's a general overview as to how the feedback came from the groupie focus and the aghaidh, the interviews in the focus groups. There are some overlapping themes, and here are the bigger ones, I guess. I had 6 major ones from the interviews and 5 from the focus groups. So we see the structure of the language planning process, community awareness being 2 common themes, and then the work of the Ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga, or the role and the working conditions of the person implementing the language plan locally. We see that as a primary theme as well. The role of the state, or state responsibility, as well, is common to both data sets. And as well, then in terms of the interviews, we have kind of two interesting ones as well: the compositions of the plans, how the plans differ from each other, and what was included in them, and also the practical circumstances on the ground. So just in terms of who's available to help you implement the plan and those kind of considerations. So I just wanted to give maybe a few points from each of the major themes that I brought out. Tustavig na hagriachti Pleanála Teanga. Na cuidú leis an bubble an plán a chuir níomh, ní achanbart plán teanga a bhaintach, ní hig le duine amháin sinna dhéanamh, caid pobal sinna dhéanamh. So in terms of the work of the Ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga, just in terms that there is nearly expectation that one person would come in and solve all the issues and themselves implement the entire plan. That obviously was not and could not be the case. So one person made the point, it is the community that's responsible for doing that. I suppose the Ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga can definitely facilitate that change, but it's up to the community and it's up to the state really to join in that regard and strengthen the structure. So in this kind of theme, some of the major sub-themes included things simple as pay for the Ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga. They're currently on a kind of a fake made up sort of pay scale that doesn't line up with any of the civil service rates. So that obviously causes some consternation. Human resources as well. For example, in certain language plans, 6 people were to be employed to be the ones implementing the plan, and then they only got 1 and they only got 2. They were looking for 3 million off the state, maybe to implement the actions in the plan, and they were granted 100,000 on a yearly basis. And it was, the state agency saying, be ambitious, write it all into the plan, we'll see what we can do. And then that's what came out in the end. Broad and heavy workload, which I've touched on a lot. OPTs leaving the role. As Tourist reported last May, up to 71 people from last May have come and left the roles, which obviously creates this huge, I suppose, level of incontinuity when it comes to the role, especially when there's one person at the cold face of implementing the plan. So when someone's not employed to implement the plan, you see very little happening, and you see this discontinuation of all the good work that's been done. Maybe the community losing interest. It's a very vulnerable thing, because that adds again to the pressure on the person who feels I have to be the one to do all this work. The lack of review, as I mentioned, and then the results of the work. There are plenty of good results that did come through the research, and there was also results that could have been maybe opportunistically better, and maybe missed opportunities. So structure and process, the structure of the process. Generally, I think it came through very strongly that there was a bit of a discontent with the state department and the state agencies responsible for the administration of the process. One respondent puts it, it's a lack of will, lack of vision on a national level, the level of the údarás, the level of the department, or lack of support, lack of coordination. And it seems to me that language planning as a sector is peripheral, not central, when you put it in the context of Irish language activities or projects on a state level. Do you know what I mean? So just in terms of that sub-theme as well, people didn't see the kind of bottom-up, top-down approach working in any regard. The communities were shouting up for help and saying what they needed, and the state was not attentive to those needs. A friend of mine put it in a certain way, Hannah New, that it's like a stalagmite and a stalactite, and we all wanted to make a column, but the drips down didn't quite drip down hard enough to make a pillar in this particular cave or cavern, whichever geographical, topographical element you prefer. So the structure in general was thought to be kind of ineffectual, lack of cohesion particularly. And there's, I suppose, because it was a new process, there's a great chance, and there still is, to be ambitious and to be, I think, clever as well. Like, I'm not saying quick wins, but I'm saying using resources better. I'm saying better size delineation of roles, better communications about it. And then obviously one of the huge issues with the structure of the entire language planning system is its dependence on volunteerism. So we see, I suppose, the way that the structure is I suppose designed is that the state gives money, the state gives the permission for the plans to go ahead. And then, as one respondent said, they kind of wipe their hands with it and they stand clear and they say, "Away, live, you know, shin shiv, mashiv, mashiv, pashiv, anava, well done." But it's all dependent on like individuals in local communities who obviously get burned out and who are very likely to drop out of the system or give it their all for a certain amount of time. So that was another major sub-theme within that particular theme. And then the role of the state as well, tied in naturally to the structure of the process. But one person said, "You don't look clued all eyes against off again." I don't think that the state has the slightest clue what we do. I don't believe that anyone reads the statements or the reports that we make. And I think it would help a lot if they understood what we do, if they had some understanding of the work. So again, to touch on the last theme, the delegation of the responsibility to save Irish or to promote Irish as a community language falling on the shoulders of individuals, local communities, and local community groups who have no training and who have been offered very, very little supports as well in terms of how best to deal with state money, how to assess Teanga or language impact from certain things that they're running. So that feeds into the whole, I suppose, sentiment towards the process. There is a lack of certainty and lack of guidance, like I mentioned at the start, the exposition of this talk as well. The last guidelines we were given for this is in January 2019, when, for example, the West Kerry language plan began implementation properly in February 2019. So we had no proper proactive guidance as to how that works. So the review falls into it, supports for the communities, and then investment as well in terms of how much can be done with the resources given. Community awareness, and I'll try to finish up soon, just in terms of bringing people with you as well. And it was found that the community being involved and aware of what you're doing and the plan generally is obviously at the foundational tenets of language planning there. If they don't know why you're doing it, then why are you doing it really? You need to spread the word in that regard. So as one person said, like the part of language planning is to change the language behaviours in the way that sometimes you have groups of people who will all have Irish but speak English, and that's very difficult altogether to change. So obviously a challenge, but the awareness that people and their awareness of what you're doing is central to the success of the role, but also sometimes their misunderstandings as well can be as important or as, I suppose, damaging as well. Misunderstandings not only of the role but of the work generally. So it's important to be clear in that regard. I'll speak very, very briefly about macro level policies, just in terms of how it fits into the process as well. In 2021, we had an amended act from the Official Languages Act, and that has, I suppose, helped the visibility of the language generally. For example, one of the major provisions in that act was that advertising by state bodies has to be done 1 in 5 through the medium of the Irish language. So now you're seeing it even in English language media. You're seeing it on the sides of buses.
you're seeing it in newspapers, you're hearing it on the radio. So again, that's adding to the general language contact on a nationwide basis, which is good. And there is another provision in terms of recruitment, which I'll talk about now. So 20% of civil servants in Ireland need to be proficient or competent in the Irish language, enough to provide an Irish language service by 2030. So we have a Pleanála Mhrifysgol, or the Irish Language Services plan, and an action plan to go with that. However, I think the major discourse at the moment is that probably won't be reached. There's less than 1% of people in the civil service now. We have through FOIs, through Shock Law, a documentary program on TG Car, just saying that they're currently provisioned the use of the Irish language. And so to get from under 1% to 20% in the next 4 years seems to be an uphill battle, but it seems to be one that at least is getting a lot of people thinking about the Irish language critically in terms of how we embed it into our policies. In terms of other things that are forthcoming as well, we're to get language standards, very much in line with the Welsh example, and they're to be published any day now. So yeah, looking forward to them now. There's been no work as part of this on the education system, primary, secondary, or in fact third level, which you would imagine would be a huge win in terms of increasing the provision and the amount of people who are speaking Irish in the state. And there's been no socio-linguistic baseline captured year on year since this committee, on which I am a part of there on the right. So I have to put my hand up as well, I suppose. But in terms of capturing the amount of people who speak Irish in the civil service as well year on year, so that's to be done for sure. And then in terms of the language planning process itself, just particular challenges. Housing, I can't really speak about Irish language communities or Irish language planning without bringing that up. And we're waiting on housing policies 2021. This picture was taken last Tuesday in a protest outside Leinster House, Houses of our Parliament in Dublin, just in terms of Irish language or Irish language communities housing state commitment. I think I've talked about that quite a bit. The work itself, the continuity issue, there's no real power or status for the ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga to walk into a community or a business and say, change your practices or do this. You're really depending on goodwill, you're depending on rapport, you're depending on bringing people with you. There is no carrot, or sorry, there is lots of carrot, there is no stick. The carrot is actually a stick, usually. And of course, yeah, some of the issues I brought up there are already around human resources, employing enough people to carry out the work, and misconceptions of the role. The bar picture there on the right is some Ifigig Pleanála Teanga and some people from voluntary committees in front of the Oireachtas Committee, the Houses of Parliament Committee on Irish language, Gaeltacht areas and Irish speaking communities as well a few years ago, just talking about the lack of resources, the lack of status, the lack of services, the lack of understanding in terms of the role. State services, I've just touched on that as well there, so I won't harp on about it, but just it is a challenge in terms of the Gaeltacht, particularly that offices are not, and they should be, and it's been recommended in every state report since the foundations of state that Gaeltacht offices would run through the medium of Irish. So overall recommendations from the PhD would be that there be language planning happening on a statewide basis, not just in geographical areas. We're saying that there should be language planning happening, in the Department of Children in the state, in the Department of Education in the state, in the Department of, Housing in the state, because the Gaeltacht and the Irish language fits into each portfolio of state life. Proper resourcing, investment, and efforts need to be taken on a macro level to support the micro level efforts currently happening geographically. So on that basis, you'd be calling for at least 4 ieithyddol Pleanála Teanga, 4 language planning officers to be deployed in each geographical area. Some of them could be thematic officers focusing on things like business or maybe family work or youth work. And we're seeing some of that trickle into work already. Like I mentioned about the pay scale as well, it has to have that attached to a current model so that when there is a rise, or if that is to happen because of inflation and just general public service works, that there is a model for that to be raised as well. And a lot of people at the end of the 7 years as well, people who are still in the roles are at the top of their pay scale as well. So it's only fitting that that is attached to something as well that is
reflecting the value of the work. I was looking just at a tiny bit of increase happened 3 or 4 years ago, just in terms of pay. But I was looking back to the original ad I actually applied for, just to get the first pay scale correctly, just for the PhD research. And there's the Ymchwil Pleanála Teanga, and then there is an assistant planner in certain areas, in 4 areas, and the assistant planner was to start at €23,000, which wouldn't be much more than a graduate level role. In fact, most of the graduate level roles in Ireland now would probably start around 35,000, 36,000, even with Udaros na Gaeltachta. So that was the type of work that myself and the assistant language planning officer were doing in West Kerry, which was night and day, weekends, trying to keep things going. So just to flag that, there's no real kind of cooperation or forum between the department, Udaros na Gaeltachta, First na Gaeltachta. They used to meet periodically in terms of language planning. That has fallen by the wayside. So for that to be taken back, but also with local representatives as well, and language planners to be invited to that as well, to give their experience and just form best practice. And then that the review would be conducted, I think probably best taken by the departments inside, or the officials in the Department of the Gaeltacht. Just they have the staff, and the plans, they all come, they end at different times, so they would have the capacity to look at the things critically. They get all the reports of the work that comes in anyway, so it should be no great shakes or no big deal to provide proper review of the work happening, because we were expecting, I suppose, when the review was procrastinated and then eventually published 3 or 4 or 5 years later, that it would be a bespoke review. You'd get analysis of what the actions were that you put into the work there, and that it didn't come to pass at all, essentially. So in conclusion, there's a lot of success in the process, and I don't mean to come across incredibly negative, but it's important to be realistic as well, particularly for the benefit of the process itself, that it can develop and that it can grow, and that people can continue to be employed in the sector, and that people can continue to do the really important work that is ongoing to ensure that stuff like that does happen. I mean, all the evidence in the PhD does prove that people are very unhappy with the current model, and it only takes a few tweaks, I think, from my perspective as well, to ensure that it is run more smoothly and the administration is more powerful. And I suppose one of the biggest things as well is that the infrastructure is there. I know we've been talking about this for 25 years now in terms of process, and since the last Gaeltacht Commission, but it is good that there is a community model now for language planning in geographical areas. So it's not all doom and gloom. That is good, but I wouldn't concede that that's the best way to go about it either. That's the department at the moment is very much saying, oh, but look, we have all these people at these places now doing all these great things, and I'm like, yes, but you've been 25 years to do this, so can we fine tune it, please? So again, the workload is far too much for one or two people to achieve. So Shinawil, Shin Misha, that's my very long apologies talk for you today. But my ein ceist, my question gide key, I'd love to take them now, and I have some details there as well if anyone would like to contact me afterwards. So diolch yn fawr.
Great, diolch yn fawr iawn, John.